What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes checking in. We always deliver the big names. Ricardo Lamas is a good friend of the show. We've covered him since the days of the WEC, then the UFC, and then even that. After that, he joined us for a military morale visit. So it's always great to see you, Rick. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Good, good, good. And we follow each other on social media, and you've been popping up a lot on my timeline. So I thought it would be a great time to catch up. First of all, I got to get your thoughts on UFC 300. First, the event, the magnitude of it and all that. And then, what I'm probably going to ask about next. And that's that Holloway Gagey last 10-second ending. You've been in one of those types of battles, right? Two bulls locking up at the very end. So maybe you can tell us what you thought as you watched that, being that you've experienced it, as a fighter, and then obviously now as a fan. So 300, start off with that. What'd you think of that first?
300, we were talking about this a little before we hopped on and started recording. It's not like it was an event that the main event and co-main event had everybody like jaw dropped or anything like that. Great fights in the main event and co-main event. But just the whole card from top to bottom was just ridiculous. I mean, you're opening up the early prelims with two former champs in Cody Garbrandt and Davison Figueiredo. Like, how could you go wrong from there, right? Two former champs battling it out. And it was just, finish after finish. And of course, when you raise the prize, the bonuses, the $300,000, you're going to have guys gunning for those bonuses. So it made for a very exciting night. I thought all the fights were awesome. Obviously, I think my favorite fight of the night, like everybody else's, was the BMF fight. And I just want to say you're welcome to everyone, because I was the one that coaxed that moment out of Max Holloway. You can listen to Max talk about it. He actually did a interview with Demetrius Johnson. And even though he threw a little shade at me, but he said he loved me. So it's okay. I love you too, Max. He was saying that in the third round of our fight, I kept waving him in. And then finally, in the last 10 seconds, that's why he decided to point to the ground and give me that chance to duke it out. But he made it seem like I did that because I didn't think we were like really fighting. Like, listen, Max, I knew I was down on the scorecards. I knew I was losing that fight. And in my head, in the last half of that third round, I'm like, listen, only chance I got right now is to kind of coax him into a brawl. And hopefully I catch him with something, which is what he did to Gagey. That's what I was hoping for, but it didn't work out. But we created that epic moment, and it took, let's see, that was 199. So it took 101 UFC pay-per-views to recreate it, but they finally did it, and he did the perfect ending to it, man. I couldn't think of any better ending to a fight for the BMF title than what happened on Saturday night.
Yeah, no doubt. It was very similar to yours, and he actually referenced the fact that he knew, like you said, in your fight, you're down, and so you're kind of throwing a last-minute strategy to bring him in to see if you can clip him, and then from his end, he's actually up, but still was willing to take that risk. But the thought was in the head because of a seed you planted. Those last 10 seconds, can you even hear the fans as you guys are just wailing, and you're ducking, I'm sure? And what are those 10 seconds like? How long does it feel like? Does it feel like 10 seconds? Does it feel like 10 minutes? Can you hear the crowd, or is it just like, like just silence?
It's definite tunnel vision. I didn't hear the crowd till after, like when we're done and the bell rang, the crowd kind of erupted. But it's definitely tunnel vision, and there's not much going through my head except for like, I hope I don't fall down and I hope my punch lands. But it was just like, it was an instinctive moment, kind of like a survival thing, right? Where you're just throwing with everything you got, and you're hoping that the guy in front of you falls and you end up staying up on your feet. So definitely survival mode, that fight mode. And, I'll be waiting patiently for my 10% finder's fee for creating that moment with Max. So Max, if you need my address, just hit me up in the DMs and I'll send it to you.
To be fair, let's just say he did. And then Gilbert Melendez and Diego Sanchez said, well, that was nice of Max to do that. Now we're waiting for Rick's 10% of that.
But
10%.
there was no point down to the ground, though. It's different. They brawled it out a little bit, but he pointed. I said, yes, thank you. That's what I was waiting for. And then we started slugging out. So A
I
little
am
different,
curious
but
though. Did Gil and Diego kind of are they on the same page as what you guys did? Remember that one? And
yes, of
did
course I remember it. That was an awesome
okay?
fight. I remember
That was
watching it and
great.
jumping out of my seat for that, for their brawl. And then Diego dropping him like in the closing seconds of the last round. Uh, those two guys, like I've rarely ever seen either one of them in a boring fight. So those guys were fan pleasers, both of them. And when you put two fan pleasers against each other, that's the type of fight that you get.
Yeah. Well, it was BMF. You're all BMFs, man. One way or another. Some of you are just a little bit more extreme than the rest. But yeah, it was a classic moment. I definitely was thinking about you. And you know what? 199. Everybody talks about 300 was the best fight card ever, and probably on paper from top to bottom it was. But 199 was pretty damn good too, man. There was some
Yeah.
great fights on that fight card. Goes was there in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What
How
do you
can
think? Is that 1 and 2? Because to me, that was in the UFC. That was my favorite card going into this weekend. My favorite of all time is Pride 33, but 199 was absolutely amazing from the first fight on. Where do you think you were on 199? Where do you think it lies compares to 300?
I don't think I ever really sat back and watched the whole card from beginning to end. When I'm there, I'm really focused on my fight. I don't really like watching the fights that are going on when I'm backstage. So I didn't really know like how great the fights were. Obviously afterwards I could sit back a little bit and watch. And I know the last, the main event with Jones and Cormier was an awesome. Was it Jones Cormier? Was that the right
No,
one?
Hendo and
No,
Bisping.
Hendo Bisbing.
no. Wait, 199 or 100?
199.
199.
No, 199 was when
Or sorry,
Bisping knocked out Rockhold.
yeah.
Hendo
That's what it
knocked
was.
out
Bisbing Rockhold. Yeah, it was Bisbing Rockhold.
Hector Lombard, and Dominic Cruz and Uriah Faber went at it.
Yeah.
Dustin Poirier was on that. Bobby Green. I
I'm
think
gonna
Tony
pull up this
Ferguson was
card.
on that card. It was
Yeah, let me pull
who's
up this
who,
card.
man. It was
Yeah,
Yeah,
when
not
amazing.
you're like fighting on the
Rockhold wins
card,
the title.
it's hard to when you're fighting on the card, it's hard to realize how good the card is because you're so focused on your fight and you don't really see everything else that's going on. You don't experience it like a spectator that's out in the stands.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let me ask you something about that moment since George brought it up. Look, this is not a barroom brawler sport. There's a lot of strategy. You guys work on a lot of things. But going forward, when Max does that, can you say no as a fighter? I mean, there's as much strategy as there is. There's also a lot of bravado in our sport. Can somebody just say, "Nah, I'm not playing that game," or do you think everybody just gets lured into that?
Well, what's special about Max doing it is the two main times that he's known for doing it, the first time with me and now at the BMF title, was he was up on the scorecards. So he was going to win the fight. And then he still, like as a showman, right, steps in the middle of the octagon, points to the ground, and gives his opponent a chance to swing with all they have at him in the final seconds of a fight that he is about to win. So he takes a huge risk, but they say with big risk brings big reward also. So he gambled and he won both times. He's a great fighter and a great person too. I've known Max since when he first got in the UFC. We hung out at like a fighter summit. We went bowling together and got to know him a little bit. And not only is he a great fighter, but he's a great guy too.
I want to ask you a little bit about Big Reward. I was at the press conference for this one, and I told the guy sitting next to me when they announced $300,000 bonuses. To me, that changed everything. How I looked at some of these fights, how some of these fighters could potentially fight depending on where you're at, how close you are to a title. Some of these guys were a little bit closer to maybe being on their way out, so maybe all that didn't matter as much. If you were still going today, what would a $300,000 bonus do to your game plan?
It's like it's like buying a lottery ticket for a much smaller pool of people that are out there competing for that prize. And I don't know I don't know how these bonuses got shrunken down to $50,000. I remember back in the day they were usually always 100,000. the first bonus I won, it was UFC on Fox 1. It was, I think it was like 65 that I won for submission of the night against Cub Swanson. But then somewhere along the way, Dana just kind of set them all at 50, which is great. Extra $50,000 in your pocket is great. But when you're talking about the highest, the pinnacle of this sport, I think the bonuses should be more. And I think you'll get guys risking more to win those bonuses. And with that, you'll get more exciting fights.
You watch a card like that, Ricardo, what's that like? I'm sure you get a little bit of the itch. Could we ever see you come back and do this just one more time?
Yeah, it definitely brings up, a lot of nostalgia and gives me that itch for sure. For me to come back, I'd have to dedicate all my time to training and doing that. So I would, I'm retired, but never say never. And everybody, for the right price, I'd be willing to come back for sure.
Who would you want to fight?
Who would I want to fight? If I'm going to come back, it's got to be for a big fight. Any huge name, Conor McGregor, maybe anybody that I even lost to, to come back and get a second crack at avenging those losses. So, I think with the name that I've built, if I come back, it'd have to be with somebody in the top 10.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I did write down McGregor's name because you kind of were one of the first to poke at him on social media. And you actually got under his nerves because you kind of did skits and things like that.
Yeah.
Since then, did you guys ever cross paths? And did he ever at least say, that was a good one? Or did you ever cross paths? Let's start with that.
We crossed paths the weekend that I went live with that video. When I put it on YouTube, we crossed paths in an elevator in Boston.
Okay, now take your time. I want to hear the details. How did this go? Who's in the elevator for how many floors? How did this one go? Don't skim on the details.
No, I won't skip on the details. So I was in the elevator with my wife, and Baboo was with me on that fight. They had brought me out to McGregor's fight to announce my main event fight with Chad Mendes. We get on the elevator. So it's us three, and then there's at least 4 other people on there. And I'm buried in my phone because from there, I'm supposed to go somewhere else and do some more promotions with Chad Mendes. So they're trying to get me to approve flights and stuff. And I'm like buried in my emails just on the phone, I'm totally oblivious to what's going on around me. Elevator stops, door opens, some more people get on, and I'm just on my phone, right? And then I start feeling like somebody tapping my foot, right? And I think it's my wife next to me. And then elevator comes to a stop at like the next floor. The door opens up. I look up and I see that it was McGregor that got on with like his entourage into the elevator. And I look up and he's just looking at me, but he's not saying anything. And they start walking off, and like right as he's about to exit, then he decides to say something. He goes, "That was a pussy video, yeah." And then I just busted out laughing as loud as I could. And Baboon helped me out. He came back. He's like, "That's because we made it about a pussy." And like then he got off with his entourage, and that was it. Like the door's closed. But like he obviously saw me when he got on the elevator, but didn't say anything until he was walking off. So, I mean, he was right in the middle of his weight cut too, so he was pretty sucked down. I'm sure he probably wasn't in the mood to get into a fight, especially since he had a fight like 2 days later. But yeah,
Do you remember who he was fighting?
The whole story.
Do you remember who he was fighting now again?
He was fighting the German dude, the old guy.
Dennis Seaver?
Dennis Seaver, yeah.
Okay.
He was fighting Dennis Seaver. That was in Boston.
Who was his entourage? I want to see. I want to picture what the numbers were.
I think it was his girlfriend, and just some other people from his camp. I can't remember if John Kavanaugh was on there or not, but I think he was going to do open workouts. So I think
there was 4 of them. One was a female and 3 guys, including McGregor.
I know it was his girl. I know it was his girlfriend or wife. Right. I don't know if they're married or not, but it was her and then a couple other people from his camp, probably some of his other coaches. Like I said, I was like oblivious, and then I saw him, and then he walked off and said that, and I was just laughing. So that's how.
Frank Trigg and Bruce Buffer once got in a fight in an
I
elevator with Dana
I've
White had
heard
to stand back
I've heard Frank
and these
Trigg tell
guys
the
were,
story, and it's hilarious. But
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I have
So
a question, Rick. So
yeah,
as the doors are closing, if Baboon makes that comment, he probably gets a fist bump from me. A good one, you know? But you know, how sometimes the doors just reopen for some
right,
reason.
right, right, right.
He might get an elbow. Like, what are you doing?
Stop
What
it.
what would have happened if the doors reopened? Like, were they trying to say something back as the doors were closing, or was that
No, I
that?
think they were. I think they were trying to get him out of there, and luckily there was no altercation. My wife at the time was pregnant. Like, we're on an elevator, so if something were going to go down, one of us was not going to leave that elevator alive. So it's good that nothing did go down.
my next question was going to be, well, what if the guys fell out of the elevator? You know how in a hockey fight,
What if
the
we got
goalies are
stuck?
just kind
No,
of standing there
what if the
watching,
elevator
and
stopped and we got stuck in the elevator? Right? And then we had to come up with a bunch of games to entertain ourselves while they got it fixed and stuff. And then me and McGregor end up becoming best friends after that. You never know, right?
tag team partners, you go to WWE, you know. But what I was going to say was, you know, in the hockey fight, they'll fight and the goalies are just kind of hanging back watching
Yeah.
the goal. I was going to ask you, how would you size up how your wife would have done against D? I think that's his
Oh, geez. My wife
girlfriend's
is
name. Like, is your
Pregnant and
wife a
everything?
fighter, or is she
my
more
wife.
like?
Yeah, she was. She did. My
Oh,
wife
she
has
was?
had a couple amateur kickboxing fights.
Oh,
She was a black belt in Taekwondo in her younger days. So
okay. So she wasn't scared then, other than the fact that she was pregnant.
no, and she grew up in the hood, man. You know how these Mexican hood girls are. So D better watch out.
That's the Chicago way, like the
That's right.
Untouchables. Wow, that's hilarious, man. Listen, I saw your name pop up for other reasons as well. Rogan, tell me about this. You were scheduled to go on, or
I wasn't
there
scheduled.
was there was
I
interest from
wasn't
his end,
scheduled.
and this regards your dad, right, in his story.
Yeah, so this is how the whole thing started. I'm a huge Joe Rogan fan. I listen to his podcast all the time. I was actually listening to it on the way home right now. But I was listening to one episode when he had Yoel Romero on, and then he had Joey Diaz, like, kind of translating. I don't know if you guys remember that episode. And he had good, I loved the podcast and all the stories he was telling, but Joe was kind of like, he'd ask him these questions that Yoel would kind of avoid. And one of the questions was, how did you see Fidel Castro? How did you see him? Who was he to you? And all Yoel said was, I just saw him as the president, and that's it. And he didn't go into anything else. He just kind of left that question as it was. So after I got done watching that, I hopped on Twitter, and this is back when Joe would actually read tweets and respond and stuff. So I said, "Hey Joe, I just saw your show with Yoel, and I think the reason why he wasn't really talking about Fidel is because he still has family in Cuba, and I think he's got a son in Cuba still. So you don't want to talk bad about the regime when you have family there, because they could make it very hard on your family who's still living there." And I said, my father was born in Cuba. He was born in a free democratic Cuba. He was actually born in the year that the Cuban Constitution was made after they won their independence from Spain. He saw the takeover of the first dictator, Fulgencio Batista, who was an elected president but decided to remain in power because he claimed that the upcoming elections were going to be fraudulent. So he threw a coup d'etat and remained in power, which gave Castro the excuse to throw his revolution. So my dad saw all of that. Like many Cubans, he didn't know how to feel about Fidel in the beginning because Fidel ignored a lot of his communist ties. And he actually applied to be a volunteer to go up and teach farmers who joined the revolution how to read and write. So he got elected for that. He went up into the Sierra Maestra Mountains where the army was in 1960. This was the year after Fidel came into power. And what he saw up there, he got kicked out of there, actually. So they told him he had to leave. And what he saw up there made him change his mind about the revolution. And when he came back down, that's when he decided to fight against the revolution. And he was the president of a national student sector of this movement called the 30th of November movement, the Frank Pais 30th of November movement. He was in charge of propaganda. And I just remember hearing stories upon stories of all these missions that they would do. The police coming to his house, him having to run out the back door, and then his police holding his parents under house arrest for 2 weeks, hoping that he would come back. He spent the next 2 years of his life living where he could, sleeping where he could, and fighting the revolution that way. Other stories of almost being apprehended, jumping out of a car, being shot at by the Cuban police.
Wow.
All until this big incident happened where he decided to leave the country after this incident. And this is an incident that I would let him tell because this is more his story, and it's actually very sad what happened. But after he decided to leave, he met with his friend who was like his second in command in his group, gave him all the folders and everything that they'd accrued from all the missions that they'd done. And he said, I'm going to the Brazilian embassy. I'm going to go to the United States. So he took over. Shortly after that, his group was infiltrated by the regime, and his friend that he gave everything to was arrested, tried, charged, and executed within 21 days, sent to the firing squads. So that would have been my dad's fate if he had not escaped at the time that he did. And then, after that, he came to the U.S. But that's the condensed version. Obviously, there's a lot more, and my dad is just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the history of Cuba and what happens to a country when you implement socialism and communism into government. So I think it's important, especially for my family, to kind of, I've never really sat with my dad and heard the whole story from beginning to end in full detail. So I think like a podcast would be the best way to do it. And I think it would be a great educational tool for people here in the United States, especially the younger generation who seem to be infatuated with the idea of socialism and communism. And I think that everybody should hear it. I think it'd be a great story, and hopefully we can make it happen. But Joe, to get back to my point, I sent him that message, and he responded back right away. He was like, "Oh my God, that's awesome! When can you come to LA?" And I was like, "Well, fuck, if you're serious, we'll come to LA tomorrow." So he was at the time he was like, "I'm doing a show in Miami. I'll contact you tomorrow." I gave him my cell phone number, but nothing ever came of it. I never heard from him after that. But it seemed like he was interested at the time, so I was just, trying to throw my shot out there again with those tweets and the posts, because in June my dad turns 84, and he's kind of one of these stories. Like when you talk to World War II vets, firsthand accounts are pretty much all gone. Now it's all like secondhand accounts, secondhand stories. So I want to get his firsthand account before it's too late and it's lost in time. So that was my reasoning for sending out the tweets and stuff.
Okay.
So can I follow up a couple questions here? You said part of the story you'd like to leave for your dad to tell, but this may be it. I don't know. Is he somebody that came over, like I hear about, either rafts or boats, or was it or is it through Mexico, or is that the part where you'd rather just him tell?
No, so I can tell you how he didn't come over on a raft. I'm glad, because there have been hundreds of thousands of Cubans who tried to make that trip and lost their lives at sea.
Right.
Someone in his group offered him a pass into the Brazilian embassy in Cuba. And through there, he stayed there for a few months. And then they gave him, I forgot what he calls it. They gave him some sort of other pass, but basically he went from the Brazilian embassy with some other people who were seeking political asylum there. They loaded them all on a plane after a few months and flew them to Puerto Rico. And he tells me that, like, when they were getting on that plane, he didn't know where he wasn't sure they were sending him to Puerto Rico. He wasn't sure if they were going to like send him right back to the regime, but he went to Puerto Rico. And then from Puerto Rico, he had a brother here in Chicago, my uncle Octavio, who sent him the money to then get a flight from Puerto Rico to Chicago. And that's how he got to the United States.
Got it. With him telling the story, is it considered a danger to your family, whether it be in the U.S. or Cuba, or do you at least know that's not the case?
No, that wouldn't be the case.
Okay, that's good.
I think all of my immediate family on my dad's side is in the United States now. There's really nobody left in Cuba. If there are, it's got to be like super, super distant relatives that I know nothing about. But I don't even know if there would be any. So there would be no dangers in him telling his side of the story.
Ricardo, so I guess one thing that kind of stands out for me, I do hope that you get this opportunity, by the way. That would be excellent. I think it's something that a lot of people need to be educated on.
Yeah.
And having a first-hand account is so much different, you know, when than reading it in a book or whatever. And so I guess what I wanted to ask you was, when your dad was at that embassy back then, news didn't travel the way it does today, you know, by text, by even social media. It takes time to find things out. Did he already know by the time he was getting on that plane what had happened to his friend?
That I'm not sure of. I would have to ask him to make sure. I think he might have had an idea, or yeah, I don't know. That's a question that he can answer, and it's a good one because I don't even remember. See, that's why I want to get this going to get the timeline right and really hear everything from beginning to end, and then have something that I can go back to and watch to really kind of let the details sink in. You know, because like I said, I've heard stories growing up all my life, but it's always been one story here, one story there. I've never heard the timeline. I've never heard it from beginning to end. And like when people ask me questions like that, I have to be like, I don't really know, because he doesn't really when he gets together with his Cuban friends and his Cuban Civic Committee, they'll sit and talk for hours, and like they talk about all that stuff. I think with some of the stuff that happened, he doesn't necessarily like talking about it all the time, but he's definitely willing to put a story out there if we were to get onto Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan has such a huge reach. And I think it would help my dad. Ever since my dad left Cuba, he never stopped fighting. Like he's ever since he got here, he's been finding ways to raise money, to send back to Cuban dissidents, to help groups that are opposing the regime today. I've even gotten involved in, I don't know if you guys remember, I made a bunch of shirts. I raised almost like $10,000 through selling shirts, and we were able to send that money to groups in Cuba that needed it, and to people that needed it. So I think it would help all around with everything.
Ricardo, we probably never shared this with you, but we had an uncle pass away a couple months ago. And
All right.
no, thank you. A few years back, George was in the car with him, and they were driving around where we grew up, and he hadn't noticed it, but he had hit record on his phone. And he was just asking him all kinds of stories. About halfway through, he realized he had been recording it, so he just kept asking him questions. And that uncle told so many stories, and hopefully my family forgives me for this, because when he passed away, he wasn't all there. He was a lot older, but we played that audio for his daughters, and they had heard stories that they had never heard before. But as he's telling stories, he would remember things, because there's some of them are stories we've heard before, but it would just jolt his memory, and he would remember little things to him that were little, but to us meant the world, right? Hearing like, oh my God, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. So yeah, I think you and your father going on Joe Rogan and telling that story, who knows how much more he's gonna remember,
Right.
how far this is gonna go as far as the people that it'll affect, right? Not just yourself, but in a way, I'm sure you probably need it yourself, your relationship with your father. I'm sure that would be a great moment. But like we said, the education on the subject, and Joe is so good at he just doesn't have somebody show up. He does his own research, and he's good at asking questions. I think it could be really educational and really great. So I 100% hope that this is something that happens, man, because it's a story that needs to be told.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate your guys' help, and hopefully it reaches the right ears, and you'll see me on there.
That would be outstanding, my friend. Just to clean up a few things here. UFC 199. I looked at it just to jar your guys' memory.
Yeah.
Bisping defeated Rockhold and won the title. Cruz defended against Favor. That was the end of their trilogy. Holloway and Lamas, you guys were the featured bout. Henderson knocked out Lombard via elbow. Poirier knocked out Green via punches. Ortega knocked out Guida via knee. Dariush knocked out James Vick via one punch KO. Jessica Andrade finished Jessica Penne via TKO stoppage. Alex Caceres beat Cole Miller. Sean Strickland was on the prelims, the early prelims,
Wow.
and he split decisioned Tom Breese. Enrique De Silva beat Jonathan Wilson, TKO punches. Kevin Casey beat Elvis Mutatic. I haven't heard that name in a long time. What is he, the the something rock and roller, or no, I guess I'm thinking of
No, that
Mauro Ronaldo, bipolar rock and roller. But
no, that
no,
was Elvis Sinisek, I think, or
oh, okay. And
right?
then Polo Reyes and Dong Huma had the fight of the night. That was the first fight of the night. They got 50K. You asked about 50K. You're right. It used to be 70, 85,
Right.
100,
100, yeah.
129 at UFC 129 when they were in that big stadium with GSP and Jake Shields.
Yeah.
And then what happened was the fight night bonuses, I think, were 25. So, and I'm not defending Dana White. I'm just giving you the history. I think what Dana said was, rather than these are here and these people are complaining that these are low, we're just going to make them all 50. Now,
Right.
what I think should happen is, I think the UFC, since UFC 199, has quadrupled and probably even more in value. And so, yeah, not only should your salaries go up, I think these incentives should go up. I think every finisher should get bonus for starters. I think it makes the fighters go for it a little bit more, right? And I also think that the bonuses should be higher. I think it's time that they get moved up to 100,000. I'm not even going to say 75 because fuck it, it's been so long. Go to 100 because you guys seem to raise them every 10 years. I'd hate for them to get stuck at 75 for the next 10 years. They can do it. But it takes us talking about it, whether it's a fighter, ex-fighter like yourself, media, and you just push it and push it. I left 165 and 175 alone about a year ago, but I was always talking about that. And then I heard it get brought up this weekend again. Like, I think the UFC could flourish with those divisions because there's so many fighters at lightweight, welterweight, and middleweight, and some are really tweeners, we call them, right? Yeah. So it'd be good for them as well. So there's a lot of things that could definitely get better, but we just got to put them out there. So we're going to try and do that with this. One last thing I wanted to follow up on was, you said you'd be open to an MMA fight and have to be a big name. One of your homies is probably the best BKFC fighter of all time, and that's Luis Palomino. He just took his first L at BKFC after 9 fights, 2 world titles. In watching him fight, have you ever thought, man, I kind of wouldn't mind doing that with the UFC's permission, I guess, since you seem to be under contract or whatever? Would you ever explore something like that? Because obviously an MMA training camp seems to be a lot more taxing than either a boxing or a BKFC one.
Listen, man, if the price is right, I'll explore anything. Some new organization pops up where they have dudes fighting in banana hammocks and, dildos in their hand. If you give me the right amount of money, we'll see. Maybe not the dildos, but the banana hammocks.
Yeah, I think we'll see if we can edit that part out. But you mentioned Chad Mendez, and he was someone that was retired for a while, and then he went and did a couple of those, if I'm not mistaken. He looked pretty good. So I guess we can't ever put anything past you guys. You guys all seem to train even when you're done. And you put in so much time in building your names. It's fun to always throw it out there. Another guy you mixed it up with, I think, Jason Knight. He also did it. So this isn't a foreign thing for fighters that are no longer in MMA to go to another sport. So that's good to hear. Is it an astronomical number or is it a reasonable number that you would tell David Feldman from BKFC?
I wouldn't say it's astronomical, but it just has to be worth the time, and it have to be an amount of money that I could take care of my family with for a long while. So, and like the bare knuckle thing, I think any MMA fighter, it's kind of on their, I'd say maybe it might be on their bucket list, because that's how MMA started, was the bare knuckle. That was like the brutal days back then. That's what made me a fan of the sport. That's what made me want to do it. So I'd never say never to anything. It's just, it's got to be worth my time to put in the training and to put my business on hold and everything and go back and do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Diego's another one. So that's what 3 guys have named off that have mixed it up, and then if you throw in Jose Aldo, he boxed.
Yep.
So a lot of people are doing things outside. It looks like the UFC's allowing them to do this, so it's feasible. And it sounds like you're down, and hopefully if promoters listen to it and they want to do something like that, then maybe you guys can make it happen, and hopefully your family would support it and not get pissed at the junkie guys for lighting the fire, right?
Right. We'll see. Yeah, man, we'll see what happens. But, I'm retired right now, but never say never.
As always, it's great to catch up with you. Good luck with everything, your business, everything going forward. And hopefully this thing with Rogan can pick up some steam. And we'd love to see your dad chopping it up with him, and we can all learn a little bit more about, the history of Cuba from somebody that was right there in the trenches for real, you know?
Yeah.
So, Rick, take care, brother. Always
Thank
great
you guys.
catching
I
up with you.
appreciate it.